Episode 133, Holding Space with Denita Bremer.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a highly trained, experienced life coach making a great impact in the lives of their clients. And together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with a coach? Here we go.
The phrase holding space is a very coach-specific lingo, and yet it is a skill that would benefit everyone. Today, Coach Denita Bremer is here talking about the term holding space and what it means to her, how we can become better at doing it, what it means for us and others, and most importantly, how it helps us to become like our Savior Jesus Christ. Denita is a trauma coach, and we have talked a lot about trauma on the last few episodes. This skill of holding space by a coach is key in helping others overcome trauma. So if you feel like you really need a safe individual to handle your experiences, reach out to Denita so she can hold space for you in overcoming your trauma.
All right, everybody, here we are. It's July when you guys are listening to this podcast, and hopefully everybody kind of got out of springtime and we get to be enjoying some summertime, I hope. We could record these in advance, so you just never know what the weather's bringing. That said, I have a very smiley, happy sunshine face that I'm looking at on my screen. I wish you guys could all see her. I'm with Coach Denita Bremer today. If you are watching this on YouTube, which you can do because we put them on YouTube, you would be able to see her there. But Denita, hello.
Hello. It's so nice to be back on the podcast.
It's nice to have you. Always nice to have you. Denita, like she said, has been here before. So she has a past episode. You can go back and listen to that. But Denita, I would love for you, for those that are listening today, to just get to know a little bit about you.
Yeah. I have been a coach for 4.5 years, which feels like an eternity, but not as long as Heather. So,
you know what? In the scheme of coaching, like that's a pretty lengthy period of time, right? If you look at how long coaching has been around, it's been around for a while, but the majority of people, it's been a shorter period of time.
Yeah. And I think especially us that are on the directory and people that are following us, right? So it feels like a long time and also a blink of an eye. I am in the Denver area. I have a husband and teenagers, and that's like a whole other episode. And I coach around trauma for LDS people, but particularly women. I have just felt the Spirit speak to me, help my daughters heal. And that has been my story, really healing from trauma. And so it's just a little bit about me.
Well, I find the topic of trauma really interesting. So I'm glad we get to talk about it today. And there's so many different facets of it. Is it facets? That's the right word, right? Like there is just so many different things we can talk about in that direction. We get to talk about something specific. Today, we're going to talk about holding space, and people have heard that phrase before, but tell me what it means to you.
Oh, such a good question. I think to me, it means separating our individual experience from another person's experience, like not getting those two things tangled up and allowing all of the experiences, like not judging them, not trying to, you need to be this way or that. That's a really long definition, but that's how I've been thinking about it, as this has just been on my heart, especially as I serve in my calling, in my ward. And I notice people and how they're struggling as I serve as a ministering sister. I'm just like, if more people knew how to hold space, I think the world would be a much different place.
And I love your definition. And I think it lends itself beautifully to really understanding that the skill of holding space is such an important thing as we strive to have Christ-like compassion and charity for other people. Like they really do go hand in hand.
Absolutely. I think that's what Christ was so good at, was meeting people exactly where they were, making invitations, but not forcing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that sometimes we kind of intellectually can see that and we're like, yeah, that's what I want. But then when we think about, well, how would I do that? We get a little lost, right? We're like, I don't know how to do that. I actually was on a walk this morning with my Relief Society president. We were talking about this because I have so many feelings and thoughts about it. And she's actually really great at holding space. And we were just talking about, why people struggle with it. And I think it's because this is something that came up in that conversation. We think it's going to feel amazing to hold space for another person, or at least neutral. But the truth is, if we're having an experience and the other person is having an experience, there's some dissonance there. Oftentimes, most of the time, it's not the same exact experience. And so it actually doesn't feel great all the time. And especially in those situations where we really want to hold space, maybe our kid is doing something that we don't want them to do and we would love to force them, but we know we can't. It's our experience versus their experience, and that it actually feels not great most of the time. And I think that's why people are like, I don't really know how to do that.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about that, like that part of how to do that. But I think that there's two different pieces here too, right? You said that the Relief Society president that you were walking with is really good at holding space. So I would love to hear, so people know and understand like why this would be something helpful to do. I would love to hear what your experience is by having a conversation with someone who is good at holding space. Like, why would we want to be good at that for the other person's experience? And then we'll also get to talk about what that looks like to hold space. But just your thoughts, like when you have a conversation with your Relief Society president, what is that like to have a conversation with someone who is good at holding space?
Well, the first thing that comes up for me is that I truly believe and feel from her that she isn't like trying to get me to do a certain thing or think a certain thing. She's just there for kind of the ride of the relationship between us, right? Like she's not saying like, you should do this or you should do that, or have you ever thought about this? Which there's a time and a place for those things, right? But it feels very open. It feels very almost like unattached, not like she's detached and off in left field, but she just, isn't trying to like insert her agenda for something. And she like wants to hear and listen to my experience, right? She's like genuinely curious, but not in a way that's like in order to get me to do something or think something or, fulfill my calling or whatever it is, right? It just feels very open. And I will say it feels like she knows who she is. She's very confident in herself, right? I think that's a little bit of this. It kind of somewhat related, not necessarily directly related. And to me, it feels like I have a lot of agency in that relationship, right? Like I could call her and be like, I'm so sorry. We set up this time. I can't. And I don't even have to give her an excuse. And she would just be like, okay, just let me know when you can.
Yeah.
Right.
The word that comes to my mind is safe. Like you just feel safe in her presence, feel safe. And I think that I love that you brought up that she feels confident in who she is, because I think that anytime you're with somebody who does feel confident in who they are, there's a side of you that feels safe by being in their presence.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting.
Confidence is really sexy, right? It's very attractive because it's like, it's solid. And I think oftentimes if someone's struggling and you're entering into a relationship, a conversation with someone, you want that like solid feeling, right? You want that home base.
For sure.
Yeah. So it's like, yes, there's a home base, there's a solidness. And also I'm allowed to come and go however I want. And there's no judgment. I mean, are we not describing Christ? Right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
He like so solid and that home base and come unto me, right? It's our job to move toward him. And yet if we move away from him, he still loves us. He's
Right.
like,
He
yep.
doesn't feel threatened. He doesn't feel, because he is
Yes.
confident and solid in him. He doesn't need us to prove anything to him about that makes him be who he is, right? He doesn't need us to be that, but
Yeah.
he is able to stand on his own and just offer us all because he knows.
Yeah. I think that's confidence, right? Is I know who I am, you get to be you, and I'll just meet you where you are. And I think that's holding space, right? For somebody's
Yes.
experience.
Yeah. Because you don't have that insecurity of trying to get them to think the same thing you're thinking. You don't have that insecurity of needing them to validate your opinions in any way. You can just let them be them.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you for sharing your experience of being with somebody who holds space, because I think that is important to understand what that feels like from that side. As far as the person who is holding space, how do we do that? What does that look like?
Yes. And I just want to preface this by saying I don't feel like I'm an expert at this at all. There's probably not one right way to do it. And I also think that we have to learn this by experience. Like we can talk about it and think about it, but it's like driving, right? Like you can learn from a video or a book on how to drive, but until you get behind the wheel and actually start feeling what it feels like to turn right or left or stop or whatever, you don't really know how to drive, right? So I just kind of want to say that. But my opinion, the how to on holding space is, I guess the first step is some awareness, right? Awareness over what is my experience and where does that stop and start, and the other person's experience. And I think probably it's best if we talk about it with like two people, but obviously holding space happens in larger groups as well. I have a story that I would love to share to kind of illustrate this.
Love stories. Let's hear it.
So I have a 19-year-old daughter who, when she was 16, approached me and said, Mom, I want to go to therapy. And so I didn't want to pry too much. I just felt like that's a huge win that she felt safe to say, I want to go to therapy. So I said, okay, I will do some research. I'll find a therapist. I get an appointment with someone and they send me paperwork, and I'm filling out this intake paperwork. And some of the questions I don't know the answer to, like, does your child experience suicidal thoughts? And so I go up to her room where she was and I'm like, hey, I have some questions for you with this, going to therapy. And we go through and we get to that question. Does your child have suicidal thoughts? And she says yes. And immediately inside of myself, I'm like freaking out and screaming. I'm like, what? But on the outside, I was like, oh, do you want to tell me about that? And she said, no, I want to wait till therapy. And I was like, okay. And we finished filling out the paperwork. And I leave and I go to my room and I go to my closet and I just bawl. I just cry, right? So I like this story because it illustrates that my daughter was having an experience. I don't actually know what exactly was happening for her in that moment. She might have had some fear of telling me that, whatever. And I was having an experience, which I was like, really freaking out, like, what? I didn't know this. I'm a terrible mom. My daughter has suicidal thoughts, right? And it was also like, how often? And she was like, constantly. And so I'm just like, oh, right? Like, heart in my chest. I mean, knife in my chest.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, I will say, I think that it is almost like a spiritual gift that I was given to be able to separate myself and see like, oh, I'm having an experience here. And she's probably having an experience. She's telling me these words. She seems very calm on the outside. Like I could have freaked out in that moment. I could have been like, what are you talking about? And tell me more. And you have to, whatever. And I didn't. I just stayed very calm on the outside. I had a thing going on in the inside, but stayed calm on the outside, and then removed myself to take care of my experience. So often our experience, we don't notice where it ends and the other person's begins, and they just get all muddled together. Right. And so that's just a story where it was like really clear. I'm sure I've had other stories where I haven't done so well at like separating those. I'm like, okay, that's her experience. She gets to have that experience. She'll figure that out with therapy. And I'm just going to go take care of me now. Right.
Yeah. Which is not easy to do.
Not easy. Right. And I do think that's why I say I think it starts with awareness, because at that point in time, I had been a coach for like 2.5 years or something. So I had a lot of awareness tools. I didn't yet have like the deeper body tools that I now teach my clients. But I had this awareness that in that moment, I could not put that on my daughter, right? I couldn't put my freak out of like, what the heck? Like she has suicidal thoughts. This is worse than I thought, right? I couldn't, like, that wasn't her job to take care of my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I don't even know if that's like the best example with holding space, but I always think of it in terms of like, what's going on for me and what's going on for the other person.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great story. And thank you for sharing it for many reasons. I think first and foremost being that I think as parents, we often feel like I should know all these things that are happening with our child, and we don't. And that's okay. And I mean, like I felt when you were sharing that with me, I felt my own parent like heart going, oh my gosh, like,
Yeah.
what do you do with that? So
Yeah.
anyway, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that.
So I said, number one is
Awareness.
awareness. I think number two, and this is what I talked about on the episode we recorded before, is getting present, right?
Mm.
Learning how to stay in the present moment. That example, like most of the time, what I see is people race to the future. And they're like, oh my gosh, if I'm freaking out now, then it's terrible. It's the end of the world. And what are we going to do? Blah, 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 right? And just staying present with like, oh, I feel like I'm feeling like there's a knife in my heart. Like I'm feeling inadequate. I'm feeling all of these things. Can I just be present to that? Right. And it almost gives you something to do when you're with another person and in conversation and in relationship with them. And I will say that this is a skill set to be able to be aware of the other person and yourself at the same time, to like be present to yourself, because in the beginning, before we're very well versed in this, being present to ourselves means we can't be present with the other person. And maybe that is what we need as we're growing this skill, but staying present to like, sometimes I even will tell my kids like, oh, I'm feeling confused or I'm feeling frustrated, right? So it's like when I want to like maybe yell at them or tell them you can't do that or whatever it is, right? Instead, I just divert to like, oh, that doesn't feel good to me. Right. So it kind of gives me something to do instead of projecting onto them,
Mm-hmm.
which then is more of a feeling of holding space. Right. So that's a little bit of like maybe the beginning steps. At the beginning, it might not be easy to be present and to have that awareness. I have found that as I practice it more and more, I'm more able to do that. Be
Well,
present.
and you're teaching your kids a valuable skill there too. You're sharing with them your feeling. You're letting them know that you experience feelings, and it's okay if they do too, because they're most likely feeling
Yep.
something in that moment as well. And you're teaching them how to become present.
Yeah.
So not only are you holding space, you're teaching some skills there.
Yeah. And on my client calls, a big part of what I do is I'm always trying to stay connected to the client's experience, to my experience, and to the environment. It's what we call multitasking awareness. And at first, it was not easy for me to do that. I could do one or the other, but not both, and definitely not all three.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much information that comes, I think, through the unspoken channels, that if we can be present to, in this example, it's a client, but it could be your kid or your husband or spouse or whatever, right? It could be like a feeling. Like, I don't know necessarily what you're thinking or what I'm thinking, but I'm feeling this, right? Like I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling whatever. And that's information, right? So noticing I mean, humans are so good at noticing little subtle changes in another person that almost bypasses our logic, right? Like I can say things like, I don't know what happened there, but I feel some sadness now. And oftentimes when I do this with my clients, they're like, yeah, sadness came up. Like they weren't crying or anything. It wasn't outward sadness, but it's like something between us, right? So my body can be sort of I call it like a compass or an antenna to pick up on things that my logical brain might not be picking up on. And there's an element there too of we're in relationship together. I'm feeling for you or with you, right? And like allowing all of that to happen, right? So we can see how like layered this is.
Yeah. Okay. So awareness and then being present.
Mhm.
Anything else you would add to your list?
Well, just from a strictly mindset point of view, I would practice recognizing that whatever the other person is experiencing doesn't mean anything about you, right? Even if it is our kid saying, I hate you so much, you're the worst mom in the world, it really doesn't mean anything about me as the mom. They're having an experience, right? That's where it can get real tricky. So I think it's harder to hold space for someone you're very close to because it's easier to make things mean something about yourself, right? As a mom or a spouse or a sister or something like that. But even like with our ward members, right? Like we have this shared tribe or group. And am I making it mean something about me? If this person in the ward thinks this about the bishop, should I think that? Should I tell them they're wrong? Should I this? Should I that? Right? Like we tend to go there. That's just as humans, we tend to be a bit self-centered. Just like really reminding, I had to do that with my daughter when she was going through depression and suicidal thoughts. I had to keep reminding myself, this doesn't mean anything about me. This doesn't mean I wanted to make it mean something about me because then I felt like I had agency to change it. But I had to keep relying on this doesn't mean anything about me. This is her experience. I'm here to support her.
And the tricky thing about that is when we are constantly making something mean something about us, our brain is no longer present anymore. It's worried on that. It's worried on the conversation that's going on in your head. And so you're right. It is this skill that we start to develop that kind of probably is almost cyclical too, right? Is when when we're not making it mean as much about us, we are able to be more present and it makes it easier for us to be aware and all of the things that you just talked about.
Yep. I just had that same thought. It's like they all sort of flow into each other. The more awareness we have, the more able we are to be present, the more able we are to kind of detach from the meaning about us, right? And then they sort of feed into each other.
Yeah. So good. So true. All right. So what are the things that get in someone's way and make it difficult for them to hold space?
Yes. I love this question so much because I think the experience of holding space is so much more about why am I not able to hold space than how to actually go hold space, right? And the first thing is if we have never truly experienced someone holding space for us, it's going to be like foreign, right? Where we almost have to experience it for ourselves first to kind of orient to what that feels like before we can go do that for someone else. Right?
Yeah.
That was my experience. I realized fairly recently in the last year or so, like growing up, college years, even probably early motherhood years, I don't think one time did I really feel that experience of someone truly holding space for me. Right. And so that's a big thing. So I just want to, encourage everyone to like go sign up for a free session with one of the coaches on the directory just to feel what it feels like for someone to hold space for you. Because I think it's quite amazing.
It is amazing. And doesn't it also go to show that we think it's just something that happens naturally? Like this is just an easy thing to do. But in all honesty, it is very rare to have a conversation with somebody who is just there and holding space for you.
Yeah, it's super rare.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping it will become less rare after this conversation. And I do think some people are natural at it. I am blessed to have my husband's aunt, who is one of the most unconditionally loving humans that I've ever met. And I think that's what I feel from her. I feel love, but I also just feel this complete lack of judgment. And like, she doesn't care what I do or what I don't do. Like, legitimately, she's just like, whoever you are, I just love it all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think she's one of the first people in my life that I experienced what that's like.
And when you leave from being in someone's presence who was like that, you just leave being, I want to be like that. What was that? Like,
Yes.
I need to figure out what that was because I want to be more of that.
Yes. It's so attractive. It's
Yeah.
so like, oh, I want more of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. The second thing I think that prevents us from holding space is that we are scared of our own emotional experience. Right? So if somebody else is really struggling, if they're hurting, if they're sad, if they're in grief, I think sadness and grief are the ones that our society most doesn't know how to be with.
Mm-hmm.
We feel that. We feel a little bit of empathy, sympathy, compassion, whatever. And we don't like to feel that way. And so if we don't want to feel that way, it's going to be real hard to hold space for somebody else to feel that way. Right. And I mean, I think that's a whole episode in of itself is being scared of our own emotional experience, right? Whether we're one of those people that's like up, down, all around, or we're very even.
Yeah. Well, when you're feeling that way and you don't want to feel it, or you're scared of your own experience of how it feels, you try to change the experience of the other person. You want them to feel better so that you don't feel so terrible, right? So you're trying to solve their problem rather than listening and being there.
So then we have an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
We're not present because our brain is racing to like, what do I say so that they will stop feeling sad?
Yeah.
Right? Whatever it is. I just felt like I wanted to share an experience I had with a ministering sister of mine who has some chronic disease. And so she doesn't come to church a whole lot. And I was really praying about, how do I minister to her? I felt a little like she didn't really want me to come, right? So I've dropped off some things on her doorstep. And just last week, I texted her and I was like, I'd love to see you in person. It's also a fairly new assignment. It's only a few months that we've been assigned to each other. And I immediately got this impression that she would not want me to come into her home. And I was just like, okay, that's fine. Well, what can I do? Well, maybe she'll let me take her out to lunch. So I texted and I said, I'd love to take you out to lunch. Is that something that you're available for? And she said, oh, I've been craving queso. So we went to a little Mexican place near my house and we had just such an amazing conversation. But she said something that has really stuck with me, which is, she said, some days I feel okay. And I actually feel like going out and socializing because she feels a little bit isolated because of her illness. But then I almost don't want to because I don't want people to think that I'm better. So that the next day or the next week, when I'm feeling yucky again, like worse, like they don't make assumptions. And I don't want them to pity me either. And it clicked in my head. I was like, she wants someone to hold space for her. However she's feeling that day, totally allowed to feel it and allowed to change the next day, right? So I just thought that was such a good example of something that we can be aware of in our relationships. I like to say, how are you feeling today? Right? Because that's so much easier to answer for somebody that maybe has some struggles. How are you feeling today? And I just told her, I said, by the way, I can do that. I can hold space for you. You can be sick. You can feel okay. You can go back to being sick. You can be angry. You can be sad, like whatever. I know how to hold space for that. Like I know how to be with you, not pity you, and not expect you to stay the same or change in any way.
Yeah, that's a great example and a great story. So I can hear some people, they're in their mind thinking, how do you hold space then without coming across as being emotionless? Like, are you just a statue? Are you just a robot? Like, what is that? How is that? How are you able to
Yeah.
do that? But when you listen to the story that you just told, I do want people to recognize that certainly you did not come across as somebody who was emotionless. I'm sure your friend that you had lunch with did not think that.
Yeah.
But
No, I teared up.
yeah.
I totally got emotional, right? I think it's just that I was able to separate my experience from her experience. Right. And so I could be like, oh, I'm feeling some empathy here. Like, oh, that's so hard. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. And I don't need you to feel better for me or feel worse for me. Cause she talked about a friend that she's like, I almost like think she wants me to be sick. Right. It's like almost that camaraderie around, yeah, we're both sick together, or this is what we do, right? This is I'm the well friend and you're the sick friend. Right. I mean, it could be a million different things. So I don't necessarily edit my own emotions. I let myself have that experience to the extent it's appropriate, sitting in a restaurant. But I also don't have judgment on her experience. I don't need to change her experience. Right. I'm just like, I'm here for all of it.
Yeah, it sounds like it actually frees you up to experience emotions, which is the whole thing, right? Not to run from the emotions, but you're able to have your own emotion and not have to worry what that might do for them as well. So it's this freedom on both sides of the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, and it takes energy to have emotions. Like emotions are energy in motion, right? So allowing yourself to have that emotion might be a bit of a release of energy. I mean, I just like to say, sometimes I'll just say in a conversation like, well, I just have to say, this is how I'm feeling right now. And I know that's not your experience. I just wanted to name that out loud. Right. I will sometimes do that. It kind of helps me to like name it and pin it. Like, oh, that makes me feel really sad. Okay. Now I can put that aside. How do you feel? Right. Which I think asking questions like that is another part of holding space, right? Is really getting curious about the other person and how does that feel to you? And tell me more about that. And just like giving them lots of time to say whatever they need to say or not say anything at all and just feel, right? But yeah, I mean, I can see how people would be like, oh, I'd have to like really hold back my emotion. And I did in that experience with my daughter. I did kind of have to hold back my emotion because it wasn't appropriate.
Yeah, you have to be able to read the room a little bit.
Yes. But sometimes it's appropriate to cry a little bit with a friend or to be excited with them, right? Even though it's their experience. So it's sort of like what feels appropriate, what do I feel like I want to say or do? And that can be my experience. And then I can go back to like, what's your experience?
Yeah, so good. Tell me what this looks like then with trauma clients. How does holding space help those who have suffered from trauma?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think holding space helps everyone really, but with trauma work, we're doing more of the work is sort of that felt sense of, are you with me? Are you not with me? Are you supporting me? Are you there for me? I think and this is my opinion, the relationship between the coach and the client or the therapist and the client is the most important factor when we're healing from trauma, because trauma is all about the felt experience and where we have disconnected from ourselves, disconnected from others. So that holding space is almost a therapy in and of itself, right? It's almost a modality in and of itself. Is you can be here. I don't need you to be any certain way. And we'll figure this out together, right? I'm here to support you, but it's whatever process your body is going through. So it's more so, I think, than if we're doing strictly mindset work where we're identifying thoughts and feelings from sort of a logical perspective. trauma is in the body. It's physically, physiological in the body. And so we want to start with a foundation of a felt sense of, oh, I like being with this person. Right. Which is why in my coaching, when somebody comes to me, I always start with a totally free session, because I don't even want to talk about timelines and pricing and how often we meet and all of that. If you get on a call with me and your nervous system, your body is like, oh, I don't like talking to her, then there's no point in having those other conversations. Right. And I don't take it personally, because every body is different. We all have different triggers. Like, I could remind you of your third grade teacher who yelled at you one time. Right. I mean, it has nothing to do with me, but you might be interpreting or perceiving or feeling unsafe in some way. And so I want clients to come and actually start with, like, how do I feel with this person? Is it like a good enough match from the get-go? Yeah, I feel like I could be vulnerable. I feel safe. I feel like I could tell her things, right? Because that's such an important aspect.
Okay, so you alluded a little bit there to your clients and what it looks like to work with you from the very beginning. Before we go, I would love for you to be able to share with people where they can find more of you, where they can get more information about working with you. I have loved this conversation. I think it's so important for everybody, whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent, whether you are just a human being in general. This is foundational to relationships. But that said, where can people find more of you?
Yeah, my website is probably the best place, DenitaBremer.com. I do have a small group membership that has its doors open at the moment, and it's called Presence. So really, the focus in that group is, how do we stay present to our internal landscape and our external landscape? And, all the things we talked about today, like what prevents me from doing that. I really focus on that somatic work. I've had clients say, oh, where do I start with the story? And I say, you know what? We don't even need the story. Just tell me how you're feeling in your body. And we go from there. So we really focus on the felt sense, that inner sense, the emotions, the maybe memories come up, sights or sounds come up, urges, impulses, right? So sometimes I have the client, like, you feel like laying down? Can you lay down? Can you lay down right next to the desk right there? And they do that, and they're not even on my screen, and I can just hear them, right? So that's more what that group is for, is going deeper on really connecting with yourself. And I also find that starting in the body, and this isn't true for everyone, but sometimes starting in the body is a more efficient way of finding out, like, what are the thoughts and all of that stuff. So I'm really enjoying it. And I would invite anybody to come check it out if it sounds like something you're interested in doing.
Ooh, lucky people that get to spend some time with you and tune in a little bit more and learn to be present. Denita, thank you so much. Is there anything you need to add or wanted to add before we go today?
I don't think so. I think we covered all of it. I just want to encourage people to not be overwhelmed by what they heard. If you're hearing it and you're like, oh my gosh, I am so bad at holding space. We all are bad at holding space at some point in our lives, and probably throughout our whole lives. And so just take it kind of one piece at a time.
Yeah. Well, it's a skill, just like anything else. You don't instantly become a great baseball player or a great pianist. It is a skill that's developed. And this is, I would probably say, a lifetime pursuit of learning to hold space.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our listeners for being here. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.